When vast empires fade into the dusty pages of history, people imagine stories that leave them in shock. But more often than not, empires begin to collapse not through legendary battles or diplomatic intrigues, but in far more unexpected ways. When people think about the fall of Rome, most imagine barbarian armies tearing down the city walls, legions being utterly defeated, or emperors being poisoned and dying in their own palaces. These images are highly cinematic and dramatic, but real history tells a different story. Empires collapse from within long before external attacks, and the most insidious and powerful force behind this internal decay is always meddling with money. The backbone of Rome's economy for centuries was the reliable silver coin. The denarius first minted in 211 BC. These silver coins were more than just metal. They were a tangible symbol of trust. Soldiers were paid with them, merchants traded goods with them, and ordinary people stored their wealth in them. The value of the denarius was directly tied to Rome's status and stability. As long as people trusted Rome, they trusted its currency. But keeping a vast empire stable is incredibly expensive. Defending borders, building roads, bridges, and aqueducts, financing armies. Everything required enormous amounts of money. By the 2nd century, Rome had reached its territorial peak, but was struggling to cover its expenses. Germanic tribes in the north posed a serious threat. The Parthians harassed the eastern borders, and rebellions frequently broke out internally. Taxes alone could not meet these expenses, and emperors believed that an old but dangerous method could solve the problem: reducing the silver content in the coins. Over time, the denarius that Augustus issued with 95% silver had dropped to 50% under Caracalla and fell below 5% under Gallienus. A coin that once embodied trust and stability had become little more than a bronze disc with a silver coating. People could easily notice the difference, feel it, and panic. A measure of wheat could no longer be bought with a single denarius, and prices continued to rise rapidly. Soldiers complained that their wages were insufficient and demanded raises. Merchants preferred barter or gold instead of silver, and local economies reverted to direct trade. As trust disappeared, emperors produced even cheaper coins in a desperate attempt to maintain control. But this only deepened the crisis rather than fixing it. This economic collapse reached its peak during the 3rd century crisis. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome experienced nearly 50 years of chaos. Emperors were deposed or assassinated shortly after taking the throne. Taxes were collected with increasingly worthless coins, farmers abandoned their lands, and trade networks crumbled. The government's desperate measures, price controls, forced labor, even death threats for violators, achieved nothing. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices in 301 AD was powerless against the devaluation of money. Laws could not make worthless coins appear valuable. The black market flourished and official trade nearly ground to a halt. People learned quickly: a law cannot fix a worthless currency. Eventually, Rome completely abandoned the denarius. Constantine introduced the gold solidus around 312 AD. This new coin, with its consistent purity, restored confidence and lasted for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire. But for the Western Empire, it was too late. The collapse of the denarius had hollowed out the empire from the inside. Armies could no longer be sustained, trade networks could not recover, and public trust was completely gone. Rome did not fall overnight. It was a long cascade of bad decisions, And the sharpest thread of that unraveling was the unstoppable collapse of the monetary system. This lesson was not limited to Rome. History has repeated similar economic disasters many times. In 20th century Weimar Germany, after World War I, the government printed marks to pay off debts, and public confidence quickly disappeared. By 1923, the price of bread, which had once cost 1 mark, had risen to around 200 billion marks by the end of the year. People found themselves transporting their wages in wheelbarrows. Pensioners faced starvation as their savings vanished. The same scenario played out in early 2000s, Zimbabwe. Currency collapse, daily skyrocketing prices, and eventually the total abandonment of the national currency. But unfortunately, we don't need to look only at extreme cases. The same pattern continues in the modern world. In 1971, the United States abandoned the gold standard, making the dollar a fiat currency backed by trust, rather than tangible assets. Just like in Rome, the temptation to overspend became irresistible. Debts piled up, the money supply expanded, and inflation gradually eroded purchasing power. Today, a dollar buys only a fraction of what it could in 1971. Coins look the same, bills look the same, but their value has quietly been eaten away from within. The essence of the story is simple but striking. When money loses its value, society itself begins to collapse. Contracts lose their validity. Trade comes to a standstill, armies fail to function, and governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gate may finish the job, but the real destruction comes from deep within the treasury. So, as an individual, what can you do? First, understand that inflation is not an accident. It is the result of deliberate policy decisions. Second, real wealth is not found in paper or on a screen. It lies in assets that retain value: land, productive business, skills, and resources. Third, never assume that stability is permanent. The Romans, Germans, and Zimbabweans never imagined their money could lose value. But history has shown this to be true every single time. The fall of Rome reminds us how fragile money and trust are. And if neglected, society itself can crumble. Remember, history may repeat itself. And if you fail to understand it, it will crush you. If you're curious about who would be least affected or even benefit if money suddenly lost its value tomorrow, watch this video. For more content like this, you can visit my channel and stay tuned for more.